Let me tell you how a person can say something so small and so devastating at the same time, and do it in a soft voice, like they are doing you a favor. It was a Tuesday, I remember that. Not a Friday when everything tends to fall apart, not a Monday when people are already braced for bad news. A Tuesday in the middle of the afternoon, when I had just gotten back from a client walkthrough, and my feet hurt, and I was thinking about nothing more serious than whether I had enough Greek yogurt left at home to make a smoothie. My phone rang, and it was my mother, Gloria. I picked up on the second ring the way I always did, because she was my mother and I had been trained since childhood to answer quickly. "Camille," she said, and the way she said my name told me the next sentence was going to require something from me. Not emotion, not argument, something more like stillness. "We've been talking, your sister and we've come to a decision about the bridal party." Now you need to understand what I was feeling in that moment. I was a bridesmaid, had been asked 8 months earlier, cried a little when Renee asked me, helped plan the engagement party, driven her to 3 dress fittings in 2 months. I was in it. I thought I was in it. "We think," my mother continued, and she paused here, and in that pause I could feel her searching for the construction that would make this go down smooth. "We think it would be better for the overall look of the photos if the bridal party was a little more coordinated, visually." I did not say anything. I knew if I spoke too fast, I would say the wrong thing. Renee's other bridesmaids are all on the smaller side. They're a certain, well, they photograph a certain way. And you know how you are, baby. You're just built differently than the others. And with the dresses being that particular shade of blush, we just think, for the photos, for the family photos especially, it might look more cohesive if you stepped back from the party. I remember the exact moment I understood what she had said. Not the words, I understood those immediately. I mean the full shape of it. My mother had just told me that my body, my face, myself was too much or too wrong or too something to stand next to my own sister on her wedding day. And she had said it the way you say, "It might rain later, you should bring an umbrella." Like it was practical, like she was sparing me something. "Mom," I said, "are you telling me I am not going to be in Renee's wedding because of how I look?" She made a sound, the kind of soft exhale people make when they think you are being dramatic. "It's not like that, Camille. It's just the photos. The family photos need to look flawless. You know how important this day is to your sister. I want you to understand that I did not cry on that phone call. Not one tear. I said, 'I hear you, Mom,' and I told her I needed to go, and I ended the call, and I set my phone face down on the kitchen counter, and I stood there in my kitchen in Atlanta in my work clothes, with my feet still aching from the walkthrough. And I thought, so this is what we are doing. I thought about my sister Renee, 38 years old, getting married to Theo Harmon in the Biltmore Ballroom in 5 weeks. A woman I had known my entire life. A woman whose hair I had braided on Sunday mornings when we were little. A woman I had sat with in a hospital waiting room when her last boyfriend broke her collarbone in a fight. A woman who had, apparently, sat across from our mother and agreed that I did not fit the picture she wanted. I thought about my mother, Gloria, 62 years old, still the kind of woman who measures things by how they look from the outside. I had known this about her my whole life. I had just never been the thing she decided needed to be cropped out. I picked up my phone and texted Diane. I said, "You need to come over." Diane texted back in 4 seconds, "On my way." I went to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of my bed in my good green blouse and my work slacks, and I looked at my own hands, my deep brown skin, my wide wrists. The hands of a woman who had built something real in this city, who had a business, who had taste and skill and a full life. And I thought about my mother describing those hands, that body, that face, as the thing that would ruin the photos. Then I stood up, went to the mirror on the back of my bedroom door, and I looked at myself for a long time. Full lips, high cheekbones, natural hair sitting wide and proud on my head, brown eyes that did not flinch. I did not look like a problem. I looked like a woman who was about to make a decision. Diane arrived 20 minutes later with a box of crackers, a block of sharp cheddar, and a bottle of sparkling water because she knew I did not drink when I was processing something serious. She came in through the front door I had left unlocked for her, dropped everything on the kitchen counter, took one look at my face, and said, "Start from the beginning." So I told her, all of it, the exact words my mother had used, cohesive, visually. The family photos need to look flawless. Diane sat very still while I talked, which was unusual for her because Diane was not a still person. She was the kind of woman who talked with her whole body, who punctuated her sentences with her hands. But she sat still, and she listened to everything, and when I finished, she said, "Camille." "I know," I said. "No," she said. "I need you to hear me say your name, because I need you to know that whoever told you that does not define what your name means." I looked at the table. I did not cry then either. I was still in the phase where the shock was holding everything together. "What are you going to do?" Diane asked. "I don't know yet," I said, and that was the truth. We ate crackers and sharp cheddar, and I told her about the client walkthrough I had done that afternoon, and she told me about a campaign pitch she was working on, and we talked the way we had talked for 12 years of friendship, easy and real, and for an hour I felt like a regular person again. Then my phone rang. Aunt Patrice. I want to tell you about Aunt Patrice. She was my mother's younger sister, 59 years old, lived in Decatur, wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, and had been the only person in our family who told the truth at full volume for as long as I could remember. She had never been my mother's favorite. She was too direct for that. But she had always been mine. "Baby," she said when I picked up, "your cousin Lena told me something tonight, and I need to ask you if you already know." "About the wedding?" I said. A pause. "Yes, about the wedding. Mom called me today." "What did she tell you?" I repeated it, the cohesive look, the photos, the blush dresses. Aunt Patrice was quiet for longer than felt comfortable. "There's more," she said finally. "Tell me." "Your mother didn't just talk to Renee about it. She talked to Theo's mother too, Mrs. Harmon. She told her that you were being reassigned from the bridal party because of a scheduling conflict, a work conflict. She didn't tell the Harmons the real reason." I put my hand flat on the table. "And Lena says Renee was there when she told the Harmons that. Renee didn't correct it. She just sat there and let your mother say it." "So they're telling people it's a work conflict," I said. "They're covering," Aunt Patrice said, "because even they know what they did sounds ugly when you say it out loud." You need to understand what that felt like. It was one thing to be told I did not look right for the photos. It was another thing entirely to know that the story being told to the groom's family was that I was too busy, too caught up in work, that I had chosen not to be there, that the absence was mine. "They're making it my fault," I said. "Yes," Aunt Patrice said, "that's what they're doing." Diane, sitting across from me, watching my face, mouthed, "What?" I held up one finger and kept listening. "I'm not going to tell you what to do," Aunt Patrice said. "You know your own mind, but I wanted you to know the whole picture, not just the part they gave you." "I appreciate that," I said, "more than you know." When I ended the call, I told Diane everything Patrice had said. Diane's very still phase ended immediately. She stood up, walked to the window, walked back, sat down again. "They are telling people you have a work conflict," she said. "Yes. So when you don't show up, people will think you just didn't prioritize your sister's wedding." "Yes." "Camille." "I know." She looked at me across the table. "What are you going to do?" And for the first time since my mother's call that afternoon, I felt something settle in me. Not peace exactly, clarity, like a room coming into focus. "I'm going to let them have their wedding," I said, "and I'm going to let the truth find its own way to the surface. Because it always does." Diane nodded slowly. "And you?" "I'm going to be fine," I said. "I'm going to be more than fine." Here is what I did not do. I did not call my mother back that night and tell her what I thought of her. I did not drive to Renee's apartment and stand in her kitchen and make her look me in the face. I did not send a long text message that I would have regretted before I even pressed send. I did not cry into my pillow or stop eating or spend the weekend in bed. I want you to understand that clearly, because people expect that when something like this happens to a woman, she collapses, she pleads, she spends a week trying to change everyone's minds. I did none of that. I slept 8 hours. I woke up the next morning at 6:15 the way I always did. I made coffee. I stood at my kitchen window with my mug, and I watched the Atlanta morning come up through the trees in my backyard. And I made the decision. I was not going to the wedding. Not because I was excluded from the bridal party. I could have attended as a guest, sat in a pew, watched my sister marry Theo Harmon from the third row. I could have done that. But here is the thing I had to sit with. My mother had told the groom's family that my absence was my choice, a work conflict, my own doing. Which meant if I showed up as a guest, I would be walking into a story that had already been written for me, a story where I was the difficult sister who almost didn't come, the one who almost let work interfere. I was not going to walk into that room and be that story. I called Aunt Patrice first. "I'm not going," I said. "I need you to know that so you're not surprised on the day." She was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." "What do you need from me?" "Nothing right now, but I'll need you to be honest with people afterward, when they ask why I wasn't there, if they ask you directly." "You know I don't lie," she said. "I know. That's why I'm calling you." Then I called my business partner, Priya. I told her I had a personal situation, but that I was not going to let it affect our work. I told her I was going to need the next 5 weeks to be full calendar, pitches, walkthroughs, meetings, anything she had been holding off on scheduling. "Are you okay?" Priya asked. "I will be," I said. I did not call Renee. I did not call my mother. I did not send a message explaining my decision. I want you to notice that, because I knew that if I explained myself, I would be opening a conversation, and in that conversation my mother would find new ways to justify what she had done, and Renee would find new ways to be sorry without actually changing anything, and we would go in circles for 4 weeks until the wedding day arrived, and I would be exhausted. I chose silence. But not the silence of someone who has no words, the silence of someone who has made up her mind. I opened my closet, and I took out the blush bridesmaid dress that had been hanging there in its garment bag for 6 weeks. I set it on my bed. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I folded it carefully, put it back in the bag, and put the bag by the front door to return. I was not going to let that dress hang in my home and look at me for another 5 weeks. I texted Renee. "I'll have the dress back to you by the end of the week. I won't be at the wedding. I hope you have a beautiful day." Renee called me within 4 minutes. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message. I listened to it once. She said she was sorry, that it wasn't her idea, that Mom had pushed for it, that she didn't know how to say no to Mom, that she hoped I understood, that she loved me, that she was so sorry. Her voice broke twice. I listened to the whole message. I did not call her back. Not because I did not believe that she was sorry. I believed she was sorry. Sorry is easy. Sorry comes in the same breath as the thing that hurt you. What I needed from Renee was not sorry. I needed her to understand what she had sat still for, and that was not something she was going to arrive at in a phone message 4 weeks before her wedding. I returned the dress on Thursday. I left it with the doorman at Renee's building with a note that said only, "Take good care of yourself." And then I went back to work. And I let what was coming come. The thing about pain, real pain, not the kind that wears off in a day, but the kind that settles into the bones of your week, is that it will either slow you down or it will turn into fuel. You get to choose which one. I chose fuel. Priya had been sitting on 3 new client inquiries she had not pushed forward because our schedule had been tight. The week after I returned the dress, I told her to book all 3. We had initial consultations back-to-back from Tuesday through Thursday. A young couple in Buckhead who had just bought a townhouse and wanted it designed from scratch. A restaurant owner in Old Fourth Ward who needed a full concept for a second location. And a corporate client in Midtown who wanted their lobby and 4 conference rooms redesigned before the end of the quarter. I walked into every one of those meetings in a cobalt blue blazer, and I was the most present version of myself I had been in months. Not performing confidence, actually having it. Because when you have lost something, when you have looked at what you lost and decided you are not going to chase it, something in you settles and sharpens at the same time. The couple in Buckhead hired us on the spot. The restaurant owner took 2 days and then called Priya to say yes. The corporate client took a week. They hired us at the end of it for a contract that was the biggest single project Davenport and Shen had taken on since we opened 4 years ago. Priya stood in our studio the afternoon the corporate contract came through and looked at me and said, "I don't know what happened to you these past 2 weeks, but whatever it is, I'm glad it happened." I laughed for the first time in a while. Diane took me to dinner to celebrate the contracts. We went to a place in Inman Park she loved, and I wore a deep red dress, and we split a good meal, and she told me about a man she was seeing, and I told her about the Midtown corporate project, and for an evening it was easy and light, and I was just a woman at dinner with her friend. "How are you really doing?" Diane asked over dessert, because she always asked the second question, the real one, after the regular ones were out of the way. "I'm doing," I said. "Some days are harder than others. I keep hearing the voicemail in my head." "Renee's voicemail?" "Yeah, not the words, just the way her voice broke." "Does it make you want to call her back?" I thought about that honestly. It makes me want her to understand what she did, not just be sad about it. There's a difference. Diane nodded. "There is." "When she understands the difference," I said, "then we'll have something to talk about." I was putting everything into work, and it was working. Not as a distraction, but as a genuine investment. Davenport and Shen had been good before. It was becoming something better. I was designing the Buckhead townhouse with more intention than I had brought to a residential project in 2 years. I was in it, really in it. I was also, in the quiet of my apartment in the evenings, thinking about what my mother had said to me. Not to torture myself, but because I wanted to understand it clearly before I had to face her again. My mother was not a cruel woman. I want to be honest about that. She was not someone who had raised me with unkindness, but she was a woman who had always cared, more than she should have, about how the family looked to other people. She had always seen Renee's lightness of skin, her slimmer frame, her straightened hair, as things that made Renee easier to present, easier to explain. And she had always seen me, my darker skin, my wide natural hair, my full body, as something that required more management. I had felt this my whole life in small ways. This was the first time she had said it plainly. And now that it had been said plainly, I could not unknow it. I was not going to spend my energy fighting something she might never admit out loud. But I was not going to pretend it had not happened either. And I was not going to be in the same room, smiling for the same photos, as if my presence had not just been decided against. My fuel was burning clean, and the wedding was 2 weeks away. The wedding was on a Saturday in April. I know the exact date. I will not forget it. Not because of what it was to my family, but because of what I chose to make it for myself. 2 weeks before, I had called Diane and I said, "Block the day." "For what?" she said. "For us. We're going somewhere." Diane said, "Tell me where." And I said, "Savannah." And she said, "Say less. I'm in." We drove down on the Friday evening, the night before the wedding. Diane had booked us a room at a hotel on the river, one of those historic buildings right on the water, with high ceilings and tall windows, and light coming in clean and white from every direction. We checked in and got dinner at a place nearby that had good shrimp and good bread, and we sat at a table by the window and watched people walk along the waterfront. "How do you feel?" Diane asked me. "Calm," I said, and it was true. I thought I would feel worse today. I thought I would be fighting it more. "Maybe you fought it already," she said. "All those weeks ago." I thought about that. She was right. The hardest part had not been today. The hardest part had been the night Aunt Patrice called, and I understood the full shape of what had been done. That night had been the weight. Everything after it had been me deciding how to carry myself through. We went to bed at a reasonable hour. I slept well. Saturday morning, I woke up to light coming through the tall windows, and I lay in the hotel bed for a few minutes and let myself feel it. The day, my sister's wedding day, happening right now without me, 4 hours away in Atlanta. The flowers being arranged, the hair and makeup, my mother moving through the getting ready suite with her clipboard and her opinions. Renee in her dress. I did not feel rage. I felt a clean, quiet sadness, the kind that does not ask you to do anything with it. I let it sit for exactly as long as it needed to, and then I got up, showered, put on my red sundress and my good earrings, and went to find Diane. We had breakfast at a place in the Forsyth Park area with outdoor seating and good coffee. We walked through the squares afterward, all those old oak trees dripping with Spanish moss in the April morning. I took pictures of the light and the architecture because I am an interior designer and I cannot help it. I found 3 details I wanted to reference for the Buckhead townhouse: a floor tile pattern in a doorway, a paint color on a garden wall, a wrought iron railing that had a rhythm to it. Diane bought earrings from a woman selling jewelry near the park. We got lunch at a place right on the water. I had good fish and cold sparkling water, and Diane had something with crab in it, and we talked for 2 hours like we had nowhere else to be. Because we did not. I was not missing anything. I want to be clear about that. I know people might think the story of that day is that I sat somewhere sad and watched the clock and imagined the ceremony. That was not the story. The story was that I had chosen to be exactly where I was, and where I was good. I found out later, through Aunt Patrice, what had happened at the wedding. The blush bridesmaid dresses that had been chosen, partly to create a certain visual, turned out to photograph terribly under the Biltmore's ballroom lighting. They went an odd, peachy orange in the flash, and all 5 remaining bridesmaids looked washed out in the photos. The photographer had done her best, but the color simply did not cooperate. My mother, apparently, had been visibly distressed during the reception when she saw the preview images on the photographer's screen. The seating chart had also had a problem. One of Theo's cousins had been placed at the wrong table due to a last-minute change, and there had been an awkward 20 minutes of shuffling during the cocktail hour. The overall thing had still been a wedding, had still been beautiful in ways, but the clean perfection my mother had been engineering for months had not appeared. And in the photos, the family photos that had been the entire reason I was removed from the picture, there was a gap. Not a literal empty space, but the eye went looking for something in those photos and found the arrangement slightly off, slightly unbalanced. The people in the room who knew the Davenport family knew that Renee had a sister, and the sister was not there. You cannot crop out a person without leaving the shape of where they should have been. I did not find out any of this until the following week. On the day itself, I was in Savannah with Diane, walking through squares and eating good food and feeling the April sun on my skin. And I was fine. 6 weeks after the wedding, I was in a meeting at an architecture firm on the west side of Atlanta that we had been referred to by the corporate client. The corporate client had liked our work on their Midtown lobby enough that they wanted us to be involved in a larger project they were planning, a mixed-use development that needed interior design on multiple floors. Their structural architect was a man named Nolan Burke. I was not thinking about meeting anyone. I want to be clear about that because I know how stories like mine tend to go when people tell them, and I do not want you to think I walked into that conference room looking for anything other than work. I was there with Priya. We had our portfolio. We were ready to talk about the project. Nolan Burke walked in at 5 minutes after 2. Tall, composed, the kind of quiet that is not shy but deliberate. He shook hands with Priya first, then with me, and said, "Camille Davenport, I looked at your firm's portfolio yesterday. The old Fourth Ward restaurant concept was interesting." "Thank you," I said. The owner gave us a lot of creative room. "That's when you do your best work," he said, "when someone trusts you enough to step back." I thought, this is a man who knows something about how creative work actually functions. We sat down and the meeting began. He presented the structural plans. I asked questions about load-bearing considerations that would affect where we could place partition walls. He answered clearly and without talking down to me, which I noticed because it was not always the case in those meetings when I was the interior designer and the structural person was someone who thought their discipline outranked mine. He did not operate that way. Priya looked at me once across the table, and I could read exactly what that look said. This is a good dynamic. After the meeting, walking out to the parking deck, Nolan fell into step beside me. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead." "The Buckhead townhouse, the one in your portfolio. The kitchen renovation. Is that board-formed concrete on the island?" "It is," I said. "I've been trying to convince a client to use that for a countertop. They're nervous about it. Do you have any performance data on it? How it held up?" "I have follow-up notes from the client. I could send them to you." "I'd appreciate that," he said, and he gave me his card. That was the whole of it. A card, a professional question, follow-up notes. But I went home that evening and I thought about the meeting differently than I usually thought about meetings. I thought about the way he had said, when someone trusts you enough to step back, like he understood something about the relationship between skill and confidence, about how real trust operates. I sent him the follow-up notes from the Buckhead client 2 days later with a short email. He replied the same afternoon. We went back and forth 3 times about material performance, and by the end of it, the conversation had drifted slightly, comfortably, away from the strictly professional and into something that was still measured but warmer. He asked if I wanted to get coffee and look at a detail in the structural drawings together. I said yes. We met at a place in West Midtown on a Wednesday morning. We were there for 2 hours. We talked about the project for 45 minutes, and then we talked about other things for the next hour and 15. He had grown up in Charlotte. He had gone to Georgia Tech for his undergrad. He had a sister in Boston. He liked architecture that did not announce itself, that made you feel comfortable before you understood why. "What made you choose interior design?" he asked. "I see how people live in a space before I see the space," I said. "I walk into a room and I see where someone would stand to feel safe, or where the light hits in the morning, or where the chair would need to go for someone to feel like they belong there. I can't turn that off, so I decided to get paid for it." He looked at me like what I had said made sense to him, like it fit something he already understood. He was not a rescue. I need you to know that. My life was not broken and in need of saving. But there are people you meet when you are already standing in your own life, fully, and they simply walk alongside it. That was what Nolan was. He was not the reason I was okay. I was already okay. He was the next good thing. The email from Curtis Bright arrived on a Thursday morning. I was sitting at my desk in the studio with my second cup of coffee and my notebook open to a page of material swatches for the mixed-use project. The subject line said, "Feature Inquiry, Davenport and Shen." I read it twice. Curtis Bright was the features editor at a national home design magazine, one of the serious ones that designers actually read, not a listicle publication, but the kind of quarterly with long-form profiles and full photography spreads. He had found our firm's work through Instagram, he said, specifically through a set of photos we had posted of the old Fourth Ward restaurant project. He described the design as visually disciplined and emotionally specific, which was the most accurate description of what we tried to do that I had ever heard from anyone outside the studio. He wanted to feature Davenport and Shen in an upcoming issue. He wanted to speak with me and Priya about the firm's philosophy, our process, and 2 or 3 projects in depth. He wanted a photographer to come in and shoot the studio and one of our completed projects. I walked to Priya's desk and handed her my phone with the email pulled up. She read it, put the phone down, picked it up, read it again. "Curtis Bright," she said. "Yes." "This is the real thing," she said. "I know." She stood up and we did not hug because neither of us was a hugger in professional settings. But she put her hand on my arm and said, "This is what 4 years looks like." I called Curtis Bright back that afternoon. He was straightforward and specific. The issue was 5 months out. He wanted to move quickly on the logistics. He had already cleared it with his editor. He asked intelligent questions about the firm, and I answered them the same way, and by the end of the call, we had a framework for the piece. When I got off the phone, I sat for a minute and thought about my mother, not with anger, with something more like clarity. She had looked at me, at my face, my body, my whole self, and seen something that did not fit the picture. And here was a national publication, an editor who had found us on his own, without any personal connection or favor, telling me that what he saw in our work was worth putting on a page for people across the country to read. I thought about the way my mother had said flawless, like that was the goal, like that was what mattered. Flawless is a surface thing. What Curtis Bright had called our work was not flawless. He had called it emotionally specific, which is a completely different thing and a far better one. I texted Diane. "We got a magazine feature." She sent back, "Camille." And then, "I need to hear everything tonight." I called Nolan because by this point we had been having regular calls, and I had become someone he checked in with, and vice versa. I told him, "That's the right recognition," he said. And the simplicity of it, no unnecessary inflation, just the right recognition, was exactly what I needed to hear. "Thank you," I said. "I mean it. That work deserves to be seen." There is a specific feeling when someone who respects your craft says something true about it. Not flattery, not the kind of praise that feels like it is more about making you feel good than about the actual work. This was different. Nolan was an architect. He understood what it meant to design a space that did something specific to the people inside it. When he said the work deserved to be seen, I believed him because he understood what the work was. The magazine photographer came 3 weeks later. She shot the studio on a Tuesday and the old Fourth Ward restaurant on a Wednesday. She was fast and precise, and she had a good eye for how the light moved through the restaurant space at different times of day. She shot the kitchen wall, the ceiling detail, the banquette Priya had sourced from a local maker. She got a shot of me standing at the studio drafting table in my forest green blazer that I did not know she had taken until she showed it to me at the end of the day. I was looking down at a drawing, fully in it, not performing anything. "That's the one," she said. I looked at the image on her camera screen, a black woman with natural hair sitting wide and proud on her head, bent over a drawing table, completely absorbed in her own work. That was the picture. And it was flawless in the only way that matters. My mother called on a Wednesday evening in July, 3 months after the wedding. I had been wondering when it would come, not whether, when. I was on my couch with my feet up, reading through some client notes, when her name came up on my phone. I set the notes aside and I answered. "Camille," she said. "Hi, Mom." She started by asking how I was doing, and I told her I was well, working a lot, a magazine feature coming up. She made the right sounds. "Oh, that's wonderful. I'm so glad." And then she shifted, the way she always shifted when the real reason for the call needed to come through. "I want to talk about what happened," she said, "with the wedding." "Okay," I said. "I know you're upset," she said. "I was upset," I said. "I've moved through it. I just want you to understand that everything we decided was with the best intentions. Your sister only wanted the day to be beautiful. You know how much pressure she was under." I let that sit for a moment. "Mom," I said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it before you answer. If you had a friend, a close friend, and her daughter was removed from a wedding because of how she looked, how her face looked, what would you say to that mother?" Silence. "I'm not trying to trap you," I said. "I'm asking because I need you to hear what this sounds like from outside it." "It's not the same," my mother said. "It wasn't about her face. It was about the overall picture." "I am my face," I said. "You can't separate them." More silence. "I have always loved you," she said, and her voice shifted into something softer, something that was, I think, genuine. "I know you have," I said, "and I know you see Renee and me differently. I've known that my whole life. I want you to know that I know it. I'm not asking you to explain it. I'm just asking you to sit with the fact that it happened and that it has consequences and that I am not going to pretend it didn't happen." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Patrice has been saying things." "Aunt Patrice tells the truth," I said. That's all she's doing. She's stirring. She's being honest. There is a difference. I heard movement on the other end of the call, and then I heard Aunt Patrice's voice, which meant she was at my mother's house. Aunt Patrice said, "Gloria, I'm right here, and I'm not apologizing for anything I said." My mother's voice shifted, became more controlled. "This is a family matter." "I am family," Aunt Patrice said, "and so is Camille, in case anyone needs a reminder." I let them have a moment. Then I said, "Mom, I'm not cutting you off. I'm not walking away from this family. But things have to be different going forward. The way I was treated has to be named, not managed. Do you understand the difference?" A long pause, then quietly, "I understand." "Good," I said. "Then we have somewhere to start." We ended the call without resolution, but also without rupture. That was the best I could ask for in a first conversation. My mother was not the kind of woman who changed quickly. She was the kind who needed time to let something settle before she could look at it clearly. I knew that about her. I was willing to give her time, but I was not willing to give her a version of me that pretended none of it had happened. Aunt Patrice texted me later that night. "You were steady. I'm proud of you." I texted back, "Thank you for being there." She replied, "Always." Renee reached out on a Sunday morning in August, not through my mother, not through a relative, directly, herself, a text that said, "Can I come see you?" Not to explain, just to talk. I looked at the message for a while, then I texted back, "Sunday afternoon, come around 2. She arrived exactly at 2. I had not seen her since before the wedding. She had cut her hair, which surprised me. The long, relaxed hair she had always worn was gone, replaced by something shorter and natural. She looked, I thought, more like herself. She came in and I made tea, and we sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat with Diane and Aunt Patrice in the weeks before the wedding, and neither of us spoke for a moment. Then Renee said, "I'm sorry." "You said that in the voicemail," I said. "I know, and I meant it then too, but I've had 3 months to understand why it wasn't enough." I waited. "I could tell you that Mom pushed for it, and I didn't know how to say no," she said. "And that's true. But the part I keep coming back to is that I didn't fight for you. Mom made that decision, and I sat there and let her. And then I let her tell the Harmons it was a work conflict, and I sat still for that too." "You did," I said. "I was a coward," she said. I looked at my sister, 38 years old, shorter hair, red blouse, sitting with something real in her face. I had known her every year of my life. I had braided her hair and sat with her in hospital waiting rooms. I knew all of her. "Can I tell you what I need?" I said. "Yes," she said. "That's why I'm here." "I need you to stop letting Mom speak for you when it comes to me. When she has an opinion about me, I need you to have your own and be willing to say it, even when it's hard." Renee nodded. "I can do that." "I need you not to tell me you're sorry every time we see each other for the next year, because sorry gets old, and I need you to show me, not tell me." "Okay," she said. "And I need time," I said. "I'm not able to be where we were before, not immediately. That's not punishment, it's just honest." "I understand," she said. We sat for another hour. We talked about her life with Teo, which was good, she said, really good. We talked about my work, the magazine feature, the mixed-use project. I told her about Nolan, not everything, but enough. She smiled at that, a real smile. When she left, she stood at the door and said, "I'm glad you're doing well, Camille. I mean that." "I know you do," I said, and I did know it. The question of Renee had never been whether she loved me. The question had been whether she loved me enough to stand up in a hard moment. She had not when it mattered. But she was standing now, and I was willing to let that count for something. I closed the door and stood in my hallway and felt something release in my chest. Not a dramatic release, a quiet one, the kind that comes when something that has been held tight finally gets to loosen. I was not all the way through it. I would not be all the way through it for a while. But I could see the other side clearly now, and the other side looked like something I actually wanted. Let me tell you what happened after all of it. The magazine came out in October. Davenport and Shen on a full spread, 6 pages, the studio, the restaurant, the Midtown lobby. My face on page 31, bent over a drawing table in my forest green blazer, completely absorbed in work that was mine, that I had built from nothing, that no one had handed to me. Curtis Bright wrote the profile himself. He described the firm as design that understands how people feel before it considers how things look. And I read that sentence 3 times because it was the most accurate thing I had ever read about what we were trying to do. Priya framed it. She printed the 6 pages and framed them and hung them in the studio entrance and said nothing about it, just hung them and went back to work, and I appreciated the understatement. Diane bought 10 copies and distributed them to people she felt needed to see them. Nolan left one on my desk with a post-it note that said, "Told you." 2 words, the right to. By October, we were 4 months in, Nolan and me, not living in each other's pockets, but moving in the same direction in a way that felt solid and real. He came to the studio opening we had for the mixed-use project and stood in a room I had designed and looked at it with the eyes of someone who understood structure, who knew what it had taken to make it feel the way it felt. And he looked at me and said, "You should be proud." "I am," I said, and I meant it without qualification. My mother came to the opening too. I had invited her. She walked through the space quietly, and at the end she said, "This is beautiful, Camille." And I said, "Thank you, Mom," and we stood side by side for a moment looking at the room. She had not said everything I needed her to say. She had not named everything the way I needed it named. But she had come. She had shown up to something that was mine, and she had called it beautiful. I decided to let that be a beginning. Renee was there too. She came with Theo, and they both shook Nolan's hand, and the 4 of us had a conversation that was easy enough to feel like something that might, with time, become natural. She was wearing a blue dress and she looked happy. I was glad she was happy. I meant that honestly. Aunt Patrice came. She was the first one through the door. She walked in, looked around at the whole space and said, "Baby, you made this?" And I said yes, and she put both hands on my face the way she had done since I was small and said, "I knew you would." I want you to understand something about that room on that evening. Every person in it who mattered to me was there because they had been there through the hard part. Not just the celebration, the hard part. Diane, who had brought crackers and sharp cheddar on a Tuesday night. Priya, who had booked 3 clients back to back without asking many questions. Aunt Patrice, who had called me on a night when I needed to know the full truth. Nolan, who had seen my work before he saw anything else about me. And I was there, myself. In a deep red dress, in a room I had designed, in a life I had not walked away from when it gave me every reason to fold. Here is what I want to say about that, now that I am on the other side of all of it. My family said my face would ruin the photos, and they were wrong. Not just morally wrong, but factually wrong. The photos from Renee's wedding did not look the way my mother had planned. The dresses photographed badly. The gap where I should have been was visible to anyone who knew the family. The perfection she had been arranging did not arrive the way she expected it to. And the photo that did turn out exactly right, the one that ended up in a national publication, the one that people across the country would see, was a photo of my face, my actual face, my brown skin and my natural hair and my eyes focused on work I loved, not arranged, not managed, not made to fit anyone's idea of what the picture should look like. That was the photo that mattered. I did not ruin anything. I simply refused to be reduced to something that could be ruined. And there is a difference between those 2 things that took me some time to be able to say cleanly. What I know now, standing on this side of it, you do not have to fight every battle at full volume. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remove yourself from a room that does not value what you bring, and then go build something so real that the absence of you in that other room becomes impossible to ignore. I was not there for the wedding photos, but I was there for everything that mattered. And that, let me tell you, is what ruined really looks like.